When Matthew sat down to write the opening of his gospel, the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, he made choices. And those choices are explosive. In a culture where genealogies listed fathers and sons, Matthew includes 5 women. 5. In a society where women were not counted in official lineages, he stops 5 times and names a woman: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, Mary. Each name is a story. Each story is a scandal by the standards of its time. A woman who dressed as a prostitute to secure justice from her father-in-law. A Canaanite prostitute who hid spies on her roof. A Moabite widow who gleaned grain in a stranger's field. A woman whose husband was murdered by the king who wanted her. And a virgin who became pregnant before her wedding. Matthew is not being careless. He is making the most deliberate theological statement possible in the first 17 verses of the New Testament. The bloodline of Jesus Christ runs through the broken, the foreign, the overlooked, the scandalous, and the impossible. And today, we are going to sit with one of them. The one whose entire book is only 4 chapters long. The one who crossed a border, buried a husband, followed a grieving mother-in-law into a country that had every reason to reject her, and stepped into a field of grain that would change the direction of all of human history. Ruth, the Moabite, the foreigner, the great-grandmother of King David, the ancestor of Jesus Christ. But what no one knew was that her story is not primarily about loyalty or romance or even redemption. It is about a theological concept so profound, so specifically foreshadowing Christ, that when you see it clearly, you will never read the New Testament the same way again. Welcome to the Journey Bible Stories. Subscribe right now. Let's begin. To understand the scandal of Ruth's inclusion in the genealogy of Jesus, you need to understand exactly who the Moabites were in Israel's eyes, and why a Moabite woman in the bloodline of the Messiah would have been deeply offensive to any first-century Jewish reader. The Moabites were not simply foreigners. They were a people whose very origin was a scandal embedded in the Torah. Genesis 19:30-38. After the destruction of Sodom, Lot and his 2 daughters take refuge in a cave. The daughters, convinced that all civilization has ended, get their father drunk on 2 consecutive nights and sleep with him. The firstborn daughter's son is named Moab, meaning "from my father." The Moabites were the descendants of incest. That was their origin story. And Israel never forgot it. Deuteronomy 23:3 made it explicit in the law. No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever. 10 generations, forever. The Moabites were legally excluded from the covenant community of Israel, not because of their own sin, but because of the sin of their ancestors and their historical hostility toward Israel during the Exodus, and the enmity ran deep. Numbers 25. When Israel was camped on the plains of Moab, Moabite women seduced Israelite men into sexual immorality and idol worship. The plague that followed killed 24,000 Israelites. This is the nation Ruth came from. This is the background she carried. This is the label that followed her across the border into Bethlehem. Moabite woman, Moabite woman, Moabite woman. It appears in the text 11 times. The narrator never lets the reader forget what she was. But what no one knew was that God was about to use the most excluded woman from the most excluded nation to put the most important person in all of human history into the world. The 10th generation prohibition was not a ceiling on grace. It was a backdrop for a miracle. The book of Ruth opens not with Ruth, but with Naomi, and it opens with catastrophe. Ruth 1:1-5. A man named Elimelech takes his wife Naomi and their 2 sons from Bethlehem, the house of bread, to Moab. There is a famine in Israel. He is leaving the land of promise to survive in the land of the enemy. Already the story is moving in the wrong direction. The name Bethlehem means house of bread, and the bread is gone. The family of God is fleeing to the nation of Moab for survival. Every detail is quietly ominous. Then Elimelech dies. Naomi is left with her 2 sons. The sons marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And then, within 10 years, both sons die as well. No children, no inheritance, no male protection. Naomi is left in a foreign country with 2 foreign daughters-in-law with nothing. Ruth 1:20-21. When she finally returns to Bethlehem and the women of the city come out to greet her, Naomi says, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." Naomi means pleasant. Mara means bitter. She is publicly renaming herself from pleasant to bitter. She's announcing that the story of her life has gone from sweetness to devastation, and she holds God responsible. But what no one knew was what the text does not say. Naomi says, "The Lord has brought me back empty." But she is not empty. Ruth is standing right beside her. Ruth, who had refused to leave, who had said the most famous words of loyalty in all of biblical literature, who had crossed the border and left everything she knew to follow a grieving old woman into an uncertain future. Naomi calls herself empty. But the woman who will change everything is standing at her side. Sometimes we are so focused on what we have lost that we cannot see what God has placed beside us. Ruth 1:16-17, the most famous passage in the entire book, and one of the most quoted expressions of loyalty in all of human literature. The context: Naomi has released her daughters-in-law. She tells them both, "Go back to your mother's houses. Go back to your people and your gods. I have nothing left to give you. No more sons for you to marry. No future in Israel for foreign women. Go." Orpah weeps. She kisses Naomi, and she goes back. The text does not condemn Orpah. Her choice was reasonable, rational, self-preserving. Naomi herself had urged it. By any human calculation, returning to Moab was the sensible decision, but Ruth clings to her. The Hebrew word, davak, is the same word used in Genesis 2:24, when a man cleaves to his wife. It is the language of covenant commitment, of bonding, of a decision so deep it reshapes identity. And then she speaks, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. Your people shall be my people, your God shall be my God." But what no one knew was the full weight of what Ruth was surrendering. She was not simply choosing loyalty to an old woman. She was choosing to become an Israelite, to abandon the gods of Moab, gods she had grown up with, gods her culture had worshipped for generations, and to transfer her allegiance to the God of Israel, a God she had only known through a grieving widow in a foreign land. She had seen what Naomi's God looked like in the worst possible circumstances: famine, death, bitter emptiness. And she chose him anyway. That choice made in the road between Moab and Bethlehem, with nothing ahead but uncertainty, is the most theologically significant moment in the entire book, because it is the moment Ruth stops being a Moabite and becomes something else entirely. A daughter of the covenant, by faith, not by birth. Ruth and Naomi arrive in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. They have nothing, no land, no income, no male protector. Ruth proposes a plan. She will go and glean in the fields behind the harvesters. Gleaning was Israel's social safety net for the poor. Leviticus 19:9-10 commanded landowners not to harvest the edges of their fields or go back for what the reapers missed. It was to be left for the poor, the widow, the stranger. Ruth qualified on all three counts. Ruth 2 and 3 contains one of the most quietly significant phrases in all of Scripture. Ruth goes to glean, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. She happened to come. The Hebrew, mikre, means chance, accident, coincidence. The narrator is using the language of random chance to describe what is obviously anything but random. Ruth does not know whose field she is entering. She has no map, no plan, no insider knowledge. She simply walks into a field, and it is the field of Boaz. But what no one knew was who Boaz was. Ruth 2:1 introduces him before the gleaning scene, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Clan of Elimelech, Naomi's dead husband's family. Boaz is a relative, a connection Ruth does not yet know she has. And Boaz's lineage, revealed in Matthew 1, is extraordinary. His mother was Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute of Jericho, who hid the spies and was saved when the city fell. Boaz was the son of a foreign woman who had crossed into Israel by faith. He understood something about outsiders becoming insiders, about people from the wrong nation finding grace in Israel's God, because his own mother had been one of them. Providence is not the absence of process. It is God working through every step of the process, the walk, the field, the harvest, the chance encounter, to bring two people together at exactly the right moment. Ruth happened to come to Boaz's field. Nothing about it was an accident. Boaz arrives at his field. He greets his workers, "The Lord be with you," and they respond, "The Lord bless you." This is a man whose daily speech is saturated with the presence of God. His first words in the book are a blessing. His character is established before he does anything significant. He notices Ruth immediately. He asks his servant, "Whose young woman is this?" The servant explains, "She is the Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from Moab. She asked to glean after the reapers. She has been on her feet from early morning until now, except for a short rest." And Boaz goes to Ruth. He does not wait for her to approach him. He goes to her, and what he says to her is extraordinary, not because of the specific words, but because of what prompts them. Ruth 2:11-12. Boaz tells her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Under whose wings you have come to take refuge. The Hebrew word for wings, kanaf, is the same word used in Ezekiel 16:8 when God describes his covenant with Israel. "I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness." It is covenant language, the language of protection, of covering, of belonging. But what no one knew was that Boaz knew Ruth's story before she told him. He had already investigated. already heard, already formed a judgment about who she was, based not on her nationality, but on her faithfulness. He extends to her what the law of gleaning required, and then goes far beyond it. Stay in my field. Stay close to my young women. I have commanded the young men not to touch you. Come and eat with us at mealtime. The law required that she be allowed to glean. Boaz's grace went far beyond what the law required. He gave her safety, belonging, bread, water, invitation. This is not just kindness. This is a preview of something much larger coming. Now we arrive at the theological heart of the entire book. The concept that transforms Ruth from a beautiful family story into one of the most precise portraits of Christ in all of the Old Testament. The kinsman redeemer. In Hebrew, the goel. The goel was a legal institution in ancient Israel with three primary functions. He could redeem land that a relative had been forced to sell in poverty, buying it back and restoring it to the family. He could redeem a relative who had sold himself into slavery, purchasing their freedom. And he could marry the widow of a deceased relative, raising up children in the dead man's name to preserve the family line. This third function, the levirate marriage, is described in Deuteronomy 25, 5-10. If brothers live together and one dies without a son, his widow shall not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her as his wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The obligation of the goel was not primarily romantic. It was covenantal. It was the commitment of a blood relative to step into the gap left by death, to restore what had been lost, to redeem what had been forfeited, to give life where death had taken it. Naomi understands this system. When Ruth comes home from Boaz's field with an extraordinary amount of grain, Naomi asks, "Where did you glean today?" Ruth tells her. And Naomi's response reveals her recognition of what is happening. The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. One of our redeemers. The goel. There is a man in Bethlehem who has both the right and, Naomi now suspects, the willingness to redeem them. But what no one knew was the full theological weight of what was about to happen. Boaz was not going to simply follow a legal obligation. He was going to choose freely, at personal cost, with full knowledge of what it would require, to redeem two women who had no claim on him beyond their blood connection through a dead man. The goel redeems not because he has to, because he chooses to. That choice, that costly, voluntary, generous redemption, is the shape of the cross. Ruth 3. Naomi gives Ruth instructions that have made readers uncomfortable for centuries. Go to the threshing floor tonight. Wait until Boaz has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down to sleep, go and uncover his feet and lie down. This scene has been consistently misread, either sanitized into innocence or sensationalized into something inappropriate. The truth is neither. It is a precisely calibrated legal appeal made using the symbolic language of covenant in ancient Israel. Feet in Hebrew culture were a well-established euphemism in certain contexts. But uncovering the feet of a man sleeping was also a specific gesture. It was an act that would wake him, cause him to notice the person at his feet, and demand an explanation of their presence. Ruth goes. She does exactly as Naomi instructs, and at midnight, Boaz wakes. Startled, he finds a woman at his feet, and he asks, "Who are you?" Ruth identifies herself, and then she says the most important words in the scene. "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Spread your wings. Kanaf again, the same word Boaz had used when he told her she had come under the wings of Israel's God. Ruth is taking Boaz's own words and applying them to himself. You told me I had come under God's wings. Now I am asking you to be the practical expression of those wings. Spread your garment over me. Redeem me. She is not seducing him. She is proposing a legal covenant. She is asking him to fulfill the role of Goel. And she is doing it on the threshing floor, at night, at personal risk to her own reputation, because she trusts something she has seen in him. But what no one knew was Boaz's response. He does not hesitate. He does not calculate the cost. He says, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." He calls it her kindness, her chesed, the covenant loyalty word that runs through the entire book. She is extending hesed to him, giving him the honor of being her redeemer, and he recognizes it as the greater gift. There is a complication. Boaz tells Ruth, "There is another redeemer closer than I, a man with a prior legal claim." Before Boaz can act, this closer relative must be given the first opportunity to redeem. Ruth 4. Boaz goes to the city gate, the place of legal transactions in ancient Israel. He finds the closer relative, unnamed in the text, referred to only as so-and-so, a deliberate anonymity that the narrative seems to assign as a kind of judgment, and he calls him aside. He assembles 10 elders as witnesses. He presents the case. Naomi is selling the land that belonged to Elimelech. As the closer redeemer, the unnamed man has the first right to buy it. Do you want to redeem it? The man says, "I will redeem it." And then Boaz adds the condition that changes everything. The day you buy the field from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. The unnamed man's calculation shifts immediately. Ruth 4:6. Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. I cannot, lest it damage my own inheritance." The unnamed Redeemer was willing to acquire land. Land was an asset. But acquiring Ruth meant raising up children in a dead man's name. Children who would inherit the land, not his own children. The redemption would cost him his own inheritance without providing a return. He could not do it, not because the law forbade him, because the cost was too high for what he would personally gain. And at that moment, the most important moment in the entire legal transaction, Boaz steps forward, without hesitation, knowing the full cost, knowing that the children of this redemption would carry Elimelech's name, knowing that his own resources would be invested in a lineage not his own. He redeems anyway. But what no one knew was the theology hiding in the unnamed man's refusal. He represents the law. The law can identify what redemption requires. The law can acknowledge the need. But the law cannot pay the price of redemption without losing itself in the process. Only love can do what the law cannot. Only the one who chooses the cost freely, knowing it will not benefit him, can truly redeem. We need to pause the narrative and do what the book of Hebrews does with Melchizedek. Lay out the typological connections between Boaz and Jesus Christ with precision. Because they are too numerous and too specific to be accidental. Boaz had the right to redeem. As a kinsman, a blood relative, he had the legal standing to act as Goel. Jesus, the Son of God who took on human flesh, became our kinsman. He entered the human family specifically so he would have the standing to redeem it. Hebrews 2:14. Since the children share in flesh and blood, He himself likewise partook of the same things. Boaz had the resources to redeem. The unnamed Redeemer could not redeem without damaging his own inheritance. Boaz was wealthy enough to absorb the cost. Jesus, the one through whom all things were created, had the infinite resources to pay the infinite price. Boaz redeemed voluntarily. No one compelled him. He was not the closest relative. He went beyond what obligation required. Jesus laid down his life freely. John 10:18. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. Boaz redeemed a foreigner. Ruth had no natural claim on Israel's covenant. She was from the excluded nation. Jesus redeems the spiritually foreign, those who were once far off, strangers to the covenants of promise, without hope and without God in the world. Ephesians 2:12-13. Boaz spread his wings over Ruth, the same word used for God's covenant protection. Jesus, Matthew 23:37, weeps over Jerusalem and says, "How often would I have gathered your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." The redemption produced an heir. Ruth and Boaz have a son, Obed. Who fathers Jesse? Who fathers David? The redemption of two destitute women produced the royal bloodline through which the Messiah came. But what no one knew was the name of Ruth and Boaz's son, Obed, in Hebrew, servant or worshiper. The child born of redemption is a worshiper. The fruit of the Goel's work is a life devoted to God. Every connection is deliberate. Every detail is theological. The book of Ruth is not a love story with a happy ending. It is a gospel preview, written in the language of barley fields and city gates and sandal ceremonies, pointing forward with extraordinary precision to the one who would redeem not two widows, but the entire human race. There is a Hebrew word that appears 3 times in the book of Ruth, and it is the key that unlocks everything. Chesed. It is one of the most important and least translatable words in the entire Hebrew Bible. English versions render it as kindness, loving kindness, loyalty, steadfast love, faithful love. But none of these captures it fully. Chesed is covenant loyalty that goes beyond what is required. Love that does not stop when obligation ends. Faithfulness that persists when faithfulness is no longer legally demanded. First appearance, Ruth, 1-8. When Naomi releases her daughters-in-law, she prays, "May the Lord deal kindly, chest, with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me." She attributes chesed to Orpah and Ruth for their loyalty to their dead husbands and to her. Second appearance, Ruth, 2:20. When Naomi discovers that Ruth has been gleaning in Boaz's field, she says, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness, chesed, has not forsaken the living or the dead." She's saying Boaz's generosity is an expression of God's chesed. Third appearance, Ruth, 3:10. When Ruth comes to Boaz on the threshing floor and makes her appeal, he says her last kindness, chest, is greater than the first. She has extended covenant loyalty to him by honoring him with the role of Redeemer. 3 uses, all pointing in the same direction. Chesed flows from God to Naomi through Ruth. Chesed flows from God to Ruth through Boaz. Chesed flows from Ruth to Boaz in the appeal for redemption. The word circulates through the entire book like a current, connecting every act of faithfulness to the same divine source. But what no one knew was that chesed is also the word used throughout the Psalms to describe God's own character. Psalm 136 repeats it 26 times. His chesed endures forever. His chesed endures forever. His chesed endures forever. The book of Ruth is a story about human chesed reflecting divine chesed. Every act of loyalty in the narrative, Ruth's to Naomi, Boaz's to Ruth, God's to all of them, is a ripple from the same infinite source. The word that holds the book together is the word that holds the universe together. Ruth 4:14-17. After the birth of Obed, the son of Ruth and Boaz, the women of Bethlehem gather around Naomi, and they say something extraordinary. Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. More to you than 7 sons. In a culture where sons were the ultimate security, where a woman's value was measured by the male children she could produce and the male relatives who would protect her, the women of Bethlehem say that Ruth, a foreign woman, a Moabite widow with no legal standing in Israel, is worth more than 7 sons. 7, the number of completeness. Ruth is more than the complete family Naomi never had. But what no one knew was the correction embedded in this blessing. Naomi had returned to Bethlehem saying, "I went away full, and the Lord brought me back empty." She called herself Mara. She publicly declared that God had dealt bitterly with her. She was wrong, not because her suffering was not real, but because she could not see what God was doing in it. She thought Ruth was a companion in grief. She did not know Ruth was the instrument of her restoration. She thought she was returning empty. She was returning with the woman who would give her a grandson who would father the greatest king Israel ever had. The women of Bethlehem see what Naomi could not. They bless God for the Redeemer he has provided, and they point to Ruth as the channel of that provision. And then the narrator does something that connects every thread of the story to the largest narrative in all of Scripture. The baby is named Obed, and Obed became the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. 4 chapters, 2 widows, 1 field, 1 redeemer, 1 son, and the royal bloodline of the Messiah. We return now to where we began, Matthew 1:5. In the genealogy of Jesus Christ, between Salmon and Boaz, a single phrase. Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth. By Ruth. Matthew does not have to include her. Genealogies in this culture listed fathers and sons. He could have simply written, Boaz, the father of Obed. Ruth's name adds nothing legally necessary, but Matthew includes her, and he includes her nationality. She is identified as the Moabite in the book of Ruth 11 times. The stigma followed her everywhere, and Matthew, in the genealogy of Jesus, places her name without apology alongside the names of the patriarchs and kings. But what no one knew was the full theological statement Matthew was making by including the 5 women he chose. Tamar obtained justice through deception. Rahab, a Canaanite prostitute. Ruth, a Moabite, legally excluded from the assembly of the Lord. Bathsheba, a woman whose husband was murdered by the king who took her. Mary, a virgin who became pregnant before marriage. 5 women, 5 impossible stories. 5 situations where, by every human calculation, the bloodline should have been broken, contaminated, disqualified, or destroyed. And in every one, God worked. Through the broken, through the foreign, through the scandalous, through the impossible. Matthew's genealogy is not a list of the holy and the righteous. It is a list of the redeemed. And by including these 5 women, by stopping 5 times to name the ones that polite genealogical custom would have omitted, Matthew is announcing the character of the Jesus he is about to introduce. This is not a Messiah who comes for the qualified. This is not a Savior who appears only in unbroken lines of respectability. This is the one who was always coming through the broken places, who was always being born through the impossible, who was always found in the field where the foreigner was gleaning, and in the man who looked up and saw her there. The book of Ruth is set entirely against the backdrop of harvest. It begins at the start of the barley harvest. It ends with the completion of the wheat harvest. The field is not incidental scenery. It is the theological stage on which everything plays out. And Bethlehem, the town where it all happens, means house of bread. The famine that drove Elimelech's family to Moab is over. The bread has returned. And in the fields of the house of bread, a foreign woman gleans the grain that will sustain her and her mother-in-law. Harvest, in biblical literature, is consistently a metaphor for the gathering of people into God's community. Jesus uses it repeatedly. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Pray therefore for the Lord of the harvest to send workers. He who reaps receives wages and gathers fruit for eternal life. But what no one knew was the specific harvest law that made Ruth's story possible. Leviticus 19:9-10 commanded that the corners of the field be left for the poor and the stranger. The stranger, the foreigner, the one from outside the covenant community, had a specific provision built into the harvest law of Israel. Not charity at the discretion of the landowner, a legal right to the edges of the field. God had built Ruth's welcome into the law 400 years before she arrived at Boaz's field. The provision for the foreign gleaner was already there, waiting for her. And when Jesus, in the synagogue at Nazareth, opens the scroll to Isaiah 61 and reads, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim good news to the poor, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." He is announcing the ultimate fulfillment of everything the harvest laws pointed toward. The year of the Lord's favor is the year of Jubilee, the year of redemption, when debts are canceled, slaves are freed, and land returns to its original owner. The Goel principle applied to all of creation. Boaz's field in Bethlehem was a preview. The cross outside Bethlehem's successor city, Jerusalem, was the fulfillment. Pull back from the details, look at the whole picture, and ask, what kind of God does the book of Ruth reveal? Not the God of the theologically correct and genealogically pure, the God who builds his most important purposes through the excluded, through the grieving, through the foreign, through the ones who have lost everything and chosen faithfulness anyway. Naomi loses her husband and both sons in a foreign country. She returns home convinced that God has abandoned her. And the entire redemption of her line, the restoration of her inheritance, the continuation of her family name, the provision for her old age, the production of the royal bloodline, comes through the foreign daughter-in-law she tried to release. Ruth had every reason to return to Moab. Every rational argument pointed home. She had no claim on Israel, no standing in the covenant, no legal right to anything in Bethlehem. She crossed the border with nothing but the choice she had made in a road between two countries, and God honored that choice with a precision and a completeness that leaves the reader breathless. The field she happened to enter, the man who happened to be watching, the law that happened to have made provision for her, the relative who happened to step aside, the son who happened to be born and named, and placed in the lineage of David. Nothing was accidental, everything was prepared. But what no one knew was the most personal implication of that providence. The God who built a harvest law 400 years before Ruth needed it, who positioned Boaz in his field on exactly the morning Ruth arrived, is the same God who has been preparing things for you that you have not yet arrived at. Preparing fields, positioning people, writing laws into the fabric of your story that will not make sense until you walk into them. The God of Ruth does not work on your timeline. He works on his. And his timeline encompasses everything, from the harvest laws of Leviticus to the genealogy of Matthew, to whatever morning you will arrive at a field that was always meant for you. Before we close, I want to speak to the person who sees themselves in Ruth's story. Not in the romantic ending, in the beginning. You have left something behind. A country, a relationship, a version of yourself, a life you thought you would have. You have followed someone or something into an uncertain future, not because you could see the outcome, but because the alternative was a return to a place that no longer felt like home. You are gleaning, picking up what others have left behind, working at the edges, not at the center, not in the place of honor. At the margins, early in the morning until evening, gathering whatever you can find, and you have not yet seen the field you are in. But what no one knew, what Ruth did not know when she walked into that field, was that the owner of the field had already heard about her, had already been told her story, was already watching for her arrival. Boaz went to Ruth. She did not have to fight for his attention, or prove her worth, or overcome her foreignness before he would see her. He went to her. He said, "Your story has been told to me. I have heard about your faithfulness. I have heard about the God you chose." And then he spread his wings over her. The God of Ruth is the God who hears the stories of the faithful before they arrive, who prepares fields before they are needed, who positions redeemers before the redemption is requested. You are not gleaning in a random field. You are in a field that was chosen for you. The owner has heard your story, and he is already moving toward you. The harvest is not over. The Redeemer has not yet spoken. Wait. Work. Stay faithful in the margins. Because the midnight moment, the moment when everything is revealed and the wings are spread, is coming. It always comes for those who choose faithfulness over the road back to Moab, a Moabite widow, a grieving old woman, a field of barley in Bethlehem, a man who spread his wings. And from that field, across 3 generations, came David. And from David, across 1,000 years, came Jesus, the ultimate kinsman redeemer, the one who became our blood relative by taking on flesh, who had the resources to pay the infinite price, who redeemed us not because he was obligated, but because he chose to, freely, at full cost, with full knowledge of what it would require. The book of Ruth is 4 chapters long, but the story it tells is the longest story in the universe. The story of a God who builds redemption through the broken, who writes salvation through the excluded, who positions redeemers in fields where desperate people are gleaning at the margins, and who always, always spreads his wings over the one who comes to take refuge. If this video opened something in you, subscribe to the Journey Bible Stories right now. Every week, we go deep into the stories that hold the universe together. Drop one word in the comments. One word for Ruth. One word for what her story means to you. Share this with someone who is gleaning at the margins right now. Someone who needs to know that the owner of the field has already heard their story. See you in the next one.